then you have to sequence your story. And this is very important. This applies across the board. This is not just your Gen Xers now, or Gen Y. Sequencing your story is very important. How do you put you can take exactly the same elements and you put them in different order, and they have much more impact in one way than the other. For example, the priest asked the bishop, he says, question for you, is it okay if I smoke while I pray? And the bishop said, of course not. That would be highly sacrilegious. To smoke while you pray, that's ridiculous. So then he goes and asks the cardinal, sir, is it okay if I pray while I smoke? And the cardinal says, of course, you can pray anytime. Your prayers are always welcomed by God. Exactly the same question, sequenced in a different way with different result and a different impression created by it. But we have to sequence our evidence. And sequencing with today is that we can't come in and talk about big injuries, talk about how devastated the plaintiff is, talk about physical pain, mental anguish, physical disability, and all that sort of thing, until they know why they care. They'll be sitting there thinking, subconsciously, if not consciously, they're thinking, okay, so yeah, he's injured, but so why do I care? Why? So what? So what you have to do is you have to begin by making them care, making them understand that this was caused, that there was this all started with action by the defendant. Liability action by the defendant. That's why we're here today, because this defendant did this, which caused injury. Now, they'll already know about the injury from Vord iron opening, but now you have to sequence your story, and in sequencing, you have to make a conscious mind appeal, which means that you can't use just words. When you start your case, in your first part of your sequencing of your story, you have to tell things about liability that you can immediately back up, very shortly back up with hard evidence. Back up with things that they can touch and see and smell and feel. Back up with photographs, back up with diagrams, back up with demonstratives, back up with hard evidence, not just your words, but hard evidence that appeals and has to be processed in the conscious mind. And because we have a very short leash. If we stand up and start talking hyperbolically about injuries, or even talking hyperbolically about this evil corporation that damaged this person, without backing it up soon, without backing it up with hard evidence soon, then that word gritty trial lawyer is going to pop right into the minds of the Gen Xers, and nothing will be in the minds of the Millennials, because they're all thinking about something else. So you have to engage them early. And the way you engage them is with a conscious mind appeal. And a conscious mind appeal is hard evidence. So be prepared, sequence your story so that you're making your points, and then you're following it up immediately with hard evidence to support it. Then it's only after you have them understanding that this defendant rendered damage to this plaintiff, then you can go into what that damage is all about. So the conscious mind appeal. You keep your emotional appeal. That's not to say that there's not a proper place for an emotional appeal, but you must keep your emotional appeal in their proper place and their proper perspective. You have to sequence your damage proof after your liability proof. So, and it's the Zigurnick effect. Let me tell you about the Zigurnick effect. the Zigurnick effect is applied to your damage proof. The Zigurnick effect is this, that people will hold on to those and believe and hold on tenaciously to that which they discover for themselves, much more than they will hold on to what you tell them. So what you want to do with damage proof is sequence it and present it in such a way that you let the jury discover for themselves the nature and extent of the injury of this plaintiff. For example, you have a permanent irreversible brain injury case. Okay, I think personally you're wasting it if you stand up on voir dire examination and say this is a permanent irreversible brain injury case. Or if you stand up on opening statement and say this is a permanent irreversible brain injury case. Because that may be received as hyperbole at that point because you got nothing to support it. You start out with this as a head injury. And then as you go through and get more evidence into it, then it becomes a severe head injury. Then as you get further into it, it becomes a severe brain injury, then a severe brain injury, then a permanent brain injury. And then only after the doctor describes it as such does it become an inoperable permanent brain damage. After the doctor says that. Because you want the sequence in the minds of the jurors to be, oh, this party's injured. Oh, this party's really injured. Wow, this is a devastating injury. Now, this is an injury that he's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. But you want them to discover that on their own. And when their mindset is that they discover that on their own, they'll hold on to that tenaciously, infinitely more than if you stand up on voir dire and say, this is a case involving permanent, irreversible, inoperable brain damage. Yeah, so what else is new? Lawyer talk, okay? The very important issue is, I've already mentioned it to you, but the question becomes, what are you doing for yourself? This is what the jurors are thinking because they're self-reliant. So what are you doing for yourself? The answer is you have to have your own plan of rehabilitation. It doesn't matter how badly you're injured. You have to have a plan for rehabilitation. Now here's the important point. If you have a case in which your party's injured and took you 2.5 years to get to in front of a jury on this, and in that 2.5 years all their injuries have cleared up and they've recovered, don't come in and claim permanent mental anguish, permanent that they still worry about that every day of their lives and they're going to worry about it for every day for the rest of their lives. That's the hyperbole that they reject, and rightfully so. Try the case you have, not the case you wish you had. If you've got a case that cleared up after 18 months, that's your case. And you tell the jury quite honestly, the good news in this case is, and you've heard the discussion of all these injuries, but the good news is this plaintiff worked so hard at rehabilitation that he managed to bring himself back to the point that he no longer suffers from any of these incapacitating injuries that were inflicted upon him by this defendant. His courage, his rehabilitation, his efforts brought him back, but he's back. So what we're talking about here in terms of evidence and proof is simply what he had for that first 18 months. And that's your case. You always have to be able to answer the question, what good purpose will be achieved by an award of damages in this case? What's this money going to be used for? And you have to be able to answer that question, and don't think about the answer to that question the night before you do closing argument. Start thinking about the answer to that question early in the game, because it's been our experience in certainly with focus groups and in debriefing juries that somebody is going to ask that question or something very similar to it in the jury room. So what good's it going to do if we give him $1 million? It's not going to make him walk again. It's not going to bring the father back. It's not going to do this. It's not going to do that. That's a standard question that can cause a lot of trouble. You need to have the answer to that question. You need to deliver the answer to that question, raise the question, and then answer it yourself as part of your closing argument. Explain how the money will make a difference in the life of the plaintiff. You do that on proving the rehabilitation expert, the proof of the spouse, the proof of others, as well as, to some extent, the proof through the plaintiff, depending on your individual facts. But you have to show that they can make a damages proof that will show lifetime necessity, and that this money is needed to change what's going to happen over the course of the entire life. But if you don't have a life care plan, then what will these damages make in the short term? What will they do to compensate for what's been done so far? And if you've got a compensatory case where you're just getting them to award money for what's happened so far, fine, then argue it that way. But don't try to stretch it out beyond what it really is. And don't ever use the term victim. Avoid the use of the term victim, and don't treat your client like a victim. And one of the dangers in putting a client on the stand and having them talk about their injuries and so forth is that, first of all, it can be perceived as whining if it's not done properly. But secondly, you don't want them to appear to have a sense of entitlement. I once put a young 17-year-old kid on the stand who was injured, and I just sat there and watched it while it happened, even though we'd prepared him. We watched him, and he got this sense of entitlement, that he was entitled to this. He was injured as a result of the negligence of the other party. Now, he's entitled to this money. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. It'll bite you. The theme is this plaintiff is doing the best they can with what they have left. They have to show also not that they've been doing the best they can, but that they are motivated to continue to rehabilitate on their own. Avoid compensating the victim. And the reason you never use the word victim is because the majority of men in a poll thought that the victim was the person being sued. Prove, and this is a very important point, prove that the plaintiff is both in need and worthy of the help of the jury. It used to be that we could just come in and prove that they were hurt, they were injured, and they were in need. We can't do that anymore. We can't stop there. Now we have to prove that they were hurt, they're injured, and now they're in need of help, but also that they're worthy of their help. And the way you show they're worthy of their help is to show that they're doing everything they can for themselves, and on their own they can't recover. On their own they can't get to where they need to be. And that so they need the help of the jury to get them there. I've already mentioned that personal responsibility is generically the universal theme, and that applies across all of your juries, and I think in all of your cases.